Now we come to the fourth and last part on the deep determinants of economic growth, which is dedicated to luck and non-economic decisions. Luck is typically not referred to as a satisfying deep determinant of economic growth. And the reason may be that you cannot do anything about it, obviously, by definition. And we humans seem to be inclined to ascribe our success to certain factors that are within our own control. So therefore, perhaps we discard luck as an explanation quite easily. And of course, related to that, the more important is luck for economic development, the less relevant is economics as such. But I would argue that looking at history, it's clear that certain non-economic aspects, decisions made by leaders for certain non-economic reasons, and as such luck, are highly important factors. I would not claim that they explain everything, but I think we should not too easily dismiss this explanation. I'd like to start with a very trivial example and something that I just stumbled across recently, but I found it very funny. And that is that Microsoft was actually founded in Albuquerque. But then the firm moved to Seattle for private, family-related reasons. So there was nothing special about Seattle at that point in time that the firm moved. However, by the 1990s, Seattle has established as a hub for the new technology. And when Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, he did this in Seattle, although he himself, by family background, was born in Albuquerque. Now, this is just a very trivial and basic example, but it seems to matter in the context of geography. So we tend to think that there is a certain agglomeration in the new tech area and so on, and that the reason for that has something to do with agglomeration economics and so on. But the main starting point of the whole thing may just have been a family-related decision. Now, of course, there are also much more tragic and consequential decisions and aspects. For example, in August 1944, the German commander of Paris actually refused the order to destroy the city that he got by Adolf Hitler. And of course, things would look very different in Paris had he not refused this order. Or Nagasaki was apparently chosen as a target for the second atomic bomb of the United States because the original target, Kyoto, was dismissed by the Secretary of War because he was there for his honeymoon. And also this shows that completely unrelated aspects could shape such very consequential decisions. And one thing that is also not very widely known is that Stanislaw Petro, Russian soldier actually, most likely prevented the Third World War. He classified first strike that was reported by an automatic system actually from the United States as a false alarm in 1983. And had he not done this, had he reported the first strike as it would have been required according to the guidelines, then most likely the Third World War would have broken out with a nuclear strike by the Russians as to retaliate against the first strike. And of course, this shows that our whole economies today depend on this having not happened. Now, let's move away from these single examples where there are many different examples that one could bring up, where really one single decision that was made for entirely non-economic reasons or just sheer luck changed the whole history afterwards quite strongly, and move on to something that we've talked a lot about, and that's the effect of institutions on economic growth. And here we often have argued with the help of this map from the Korean Peninsula, where the north is poor and the south is rich nowadays, that institutions matter a great deal for economic development. However, what shapes these institutions in the first place could again be very much due to luck or non-economic decisions, as the Korean War itself has shown. The reason for this is that a few weeks after the beginning of the Korean War, the South Korean forces were almost completely defeated. They only held a small part in the south of Korea, around the area of Busan. And then 21 UN member states contributed a force that supported the South, with the major supporter being the US. They sent in huge reinforcements and launched a counter-offensive with which they pushed back the forces of North Korea almost until all of North Korea was under control of the South, so until the Chinese border. And then China entered the war, which again led to a retreat of the UN forces. So this is all depicted here in this map, where we have the situation at the beginning of the Korean War, where South and North Korea were split among the 38th parallel. Then the war started, and North Korean forces pushed back the South Korean forces until only this small area here was still held by South Korean forces. Then the US entered the war, and the 21 UN member states that sent reinforcements, and they pushed back the North Korean forces very quickly. So in October 1950, they were almost where the Korean War began. But then they pushed further, and in November 1950, they had reached the Chinese border, and only these parts of North Korea were still held by North Korean forces. But then China entered the war, pushed back the forces of South Korea and the US again, until at some point the ceasefire was established. So in a nutshell, this shows that luck and non-economic decisions by military leaders actually can shape to a great deal the institutional outcomes that we claim are then shaping economic development. And we see a similar story playing out in Europe, where we see here the map of Europe after the Second World War, where we had the Iron Curtain going along here that split the communist sphere of influence of the Soviet Union and Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria from Western European countries, West Germany, and so on and so forth. So the question is, how did this split here actually emerge? And now, basically, the division of Germany was decided in September 1944. And why it was decided at the place that it happened later on may have been due to the fact of where the forces of the Western Allies and the Soviet Union forces stood at that time. And that in turn heavily depended, of course, on the landing of the Western Allies in June 1944 in the Normandy in France. However, the landings heavily depended on a suitable weather. So on June the 6th, the weather was actually good, and under these conditions, the landings were successful. But on June the 5th, for which the landing was originally planned, the weather was very bad, such that the landing would most likely have failed. And after June the 6th, the next day, with a suitable tide, was June the 19th. And on that day and the following day, there was actually a storm that would have prevented the landing altogether. So had it not happened on June the 6th, perhaps it would only have occurred much, much later. And as I said, the division of Germany was decided in September 1944, and the map would likely have looked rather different had the landing not taken place on June the 6th. So again, also this shows that institutions affect growth, but luck and non-economic decisions can determine to a huge extent actually where the different institutions emerge. Overall, I think this should just serve us to keep in mind that there are other things apart from economics that are important, and that we should not forget about this. Although we cannot affect luck, and perhaps we can also not have any influences on certain decisions by leaders or military personnel and so on and so forth, I think it's nevertheless important to keep in mind that a lot of the pathways that we had in history depended to a crucial extent on such events that are not related to economics. I'd like to briefly summarize our insights from these lectures on the fundamental causes of economic growth. We have seen that there are mainly four that may matter: geography, institutions, culture, and luck. And I think there are plausible theories and credible evidence that all of them matter to some degree in explaining economic growth. Overall, I would, however, be very cautious with respect to monocausal theories. So if somebody says it's all institutions, or it's all culture, or it's all luck, or whatever, and everything else does not play any role, then I would be very skeptical. I think here it is important to remember this allegory of Angus Deaton, who said that when you want to bake a cake, you need a lot of different ingredients, and without one of them, the cake would not be a good one. And so I think it's with economic growth. So we need more ingredients, and they reinforce each other, and so on and so forth. And the different aspects may also change in their importance over time. So, for example, geography may be most important historically, when there were no institutions yet developed, and institutions, for example, may be more important later on.